Woo! Trying to find my way, 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 trying to find my way. I'm trying, change me.
My faith is in God alone, beyond a reasonable doubt. This brainstorm, pouring rain on your seeds in a drought. Just trying to lay a couple seeds in the mouth. Thanks for listening. You ever get the feeling you was missing?
What up, y'all? It's your hometown hero, Scott Lane, the Black Bruce Wayne, a.k.a. the real Adam Coleman. So, you riding with Tru-ID. I have discovered the secret to maintaining godly humility. After having interviewed several guests back-to-back who are all smarter than I am, I now realize that regularly talking to folks who know more than you do is a shortcut to making sure you're not thinking of yourself more highly than you ought to think. So that's a little one to grow on there, a little freebie. But our guest today is keeping that trend alive for me. So as I believe, I think he's got more letters after his name than in it. So we about to get scholarly, Tru-ID vibing with Esau McCaulley. How you doing there, brother?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
I can't complain, man. Can't complain. You know, I'm on cloud 9 right now. Got a dynamite guest, and I'm ready to dig in. Just go ahead and tell our folks, a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you're up to, that sort of thing.
As you said, my name is Esau McCaulley. I'm from Huntsville, Alabama, T.L. Johnson High School. I am currently teaching New Testament at Northeastern Seminary in Rochester, New York. I'm finishing up a PhD in New Testament from University of St. Andrews, and I'm actually flying to Scotland on April the 3rd to defend my thesis. So this is kind of hopefully the end of about a 3 or 4 year journey to get this doctorate and finally be done with school at the age of like 36 or 37. I'm not even sure how old I am right now. So looking forward to that and enjoying this teaching the Bible at my school. I work at a great school and I love it here.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah, I barely got out of my master's program, man. So I can imagine. I thought about doing a doctorate, but I was like, I'll leave that to people like you.
I don't know why they keep letting me in the schools, man.
I feel you.
Every time I get an acceptance letter, I'm like, what? I get to keep going? Okay, we'll do it.
Got you. Well, I got some bad news for you, man. You know, unfortunately, your first name is Esau, and I know my Hebrew Israelite listeners out there can't stand Esau and Edomite. So, unfortunately, we probably lost about 1/3 of our listeners. You know, once we said what your name is. You know, but
I know, man. I know. Let me tell you something about Esau. Esau gets a bad name because let me drop a little Esau knowledge on your people.
Okay.
You know, at the end of the not the end at the climax of the Jacob and Esau narrative, when they each other, what happens? Do you know what happens in that story? What do? They hug it out, right?
Yeah, true.
So, like, despite the fact that Jacob's been shady all of that time, Esau kind of runs up to him and hugs him and forgives him, despite the fact that he had did him wrong.
Right.
You fast forward to the New Testament, probably the most famous passage in the New Testament, and one of the most famous ones is the story of the prodigal son. And you see a repeat of the same scene that you see between Esau and Jacob with the father and the prodigal son. And just like Esau, the father throws his hands around his lost son who had been shady and forgives him. So a lot of scholars tell you that the story, that the reunion of the prodigal son is actually modeled on the reunion of Jacob and Esau. So back up off Esau.
Oh, snap. Snap. These bars already. That's what's up, man. I've never even thought about that.
I've been carrying Esau around my whole life, though, so you got to forgive me. I'm the leading scholar.
Oh, snap. You're the leading scholar on Esau.
On Esau. I got Esau stuff to say. Let Esau be great.
That's make Esau great again?
Yeah.
Man, that's dope, though. I've never heard that before. I've never even thought about it, but it makes a lot of sense. You know. So I tell you what, you definitely know that Bible, bro. So let's get at it right here, man. You know, unfortunately, and you know how it goes. There's a lot of bad information on the internet. You know, and so one of the reasons I brought you on is to get a scholarly perspective, just to help people out, man. And you know, unfortunately, you got these YouTube scholars out here. Somebody watches one YouTube video for like an hour, and all of a sudden they think they've debunked the entirety of Christianity. Help our people out, man. Like, what are some things that folks can look for to help them differentiate between solid sources and unreliable sources?
I think one of the things that I would say to people is that you have to be as relentless in pursuit of orthodoxy as you are casual in its rejection. So when I say that, I mean, like, folks will like read one thing and then they'll like casually toss aside 2,000 years of church history. And so we know what it means. I mean, everybody can't always be reading the most deep stuff. So everyone kind of have blogs or websites and stuff that you read that you kind of just Google if you have a problem. But you don't use that if you're really sick, right? So if you kind of say, I got a cold, you might Google cold and see some remedies. But if you are really sick and you worry that whether or not you're going to live or die, you actually go to a doctor, right? You make an appointment, you sit down, you go to the doctor's office, because you recognize the difference between a basic level of information and when it really, really matters, I go to the professionals. And so if your faith is something that really, really matters to you, and it's something that is probably the ultimate question that we ask. I mean, what's more important than whether or not there's a God and what his character is? Sure. So if there's a question of that importance, what level of research are you doing to come to the conclusion about that? Right? So if you imagine, at least in your brain, the judgment, and you come before the living God, right? Jesus is standing in front of you. I hate to be like too serious about it. And you go like, well, Jesus, I was following you until I saw this thing on YouTube. You might get the side eye, right? Right. So what I say to people, and I used to do college ministry. I was like, look, man, we've been doing Christianity for 2,000 years. You need to read 5 classics or 5 serious works of scholarship before you change your opinion about something. You can't just say, well, my pastor used to always say this, and then I heard this on the radio. That's taking your faith not very seriously. And for a question that's serious, you need to be a big boy and do research. I mean, if you're going to get married to somebody, you're not just going to meet them one day and then marry them the next. Right? You're going to spend time with them, get to know them, see what they about, see what they family about, see how they live. Like, do research, because the person that you marry is a lifelong decision. And if you make that decision without all of the data, you might end up with some real trauma. And in the same way, in our faith, you can't make serious decisions off of like a geoscience website. They've been updated. I mean, if the font ain't even right on the website, I'm not going to take you seriously. And so that's what I would say. I don't know if I'm kind of going on, but I would say it really matters that you take the time to really vet your sources and ask yourself, is this person who is expert? Because, for me, sure, I could have read a couple of books and kind of threw up a website and did what I do. But I spent 15 years of my life learning this stuff so that I can speak with the credentials necessary to kind of be in conversation in my field. And in the same way, I guess you couldn't just show up at a hospital saying, I Googled about medicine, I want to diagnose people. Where I'm from, in the academic world, you can't just run up on me and say, hey, man, I got a blog, and start trying to argue, because there's levels to this. So if people haven't really put in the time to kind of get to the level, in a lot of ways, it's hard to even have a conversation, because we're speaking often 2 different languages, because you don't even know the data to really engage in the conversation. So I don't want to be dismissive, and I don't want to say that everything is about degrees, because, information is out there. But there is something to be said for taking the time to become qualified. And we've all had struggles in other fields with unqualified folks who don't know what they're talking about, causing problems. And I think that's the same thing that you see a lot in kind of popular apologetics in the church.
Sure. And I always say to people, too, is like, if you're trying to convince me of something, you hand me a book. It's like 300 pages on, in regard to history, but I look in the back and there's no bibliography. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I'm not gonna take that source seriously. But these are really the types of things that we're seeing, though. I mean, people are just not able to identify a reliable source from an unreliable source. So let's say if somebody hands you a book, what are some things that you're looking for that kind of tell you that this book is legit, or that this person has really done their homework?
Well, whenever you talk about someone who's trying to argue for a revision of, well, first thing I look at the publisher. So if the publisher, if you couldn't find anybody who wants to publish your book, odds are it's going to be problematic. So every now and then you hear stories like Harry Potter, where Harry Potter went to like 15 different publishers and none of them wanted it. And then the 16th person took it and it blew up, becoming the greatest hit of all time, right? Mm-hmm. But 9 times out of 10, publishers are right. They don't want your book because your book is not very good. And so if I look on the back and it's by like mom and pop publishing, it's the same thing so that's to be the second thing I say is, does the person know how to argue, right? So whenever you address an issue in scholarship, the first thing you have to do is to be able to frame the question. So do you actually know what you're talking about? Can you say, for instance, we're going to talk about the deity of Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. Does the person actually understand in a real deep way how Christians are spoken about the deity of Jesus? So can they lay this out at the beginning of their book in an accurate way, or do they present a caricature, right? Mm-hmm. If you show me that you understand the field, right, then can you interact with the consensus in a way that changes my mind, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're going to make any argument, what you have to say is, this is what everybody else has said, right? Here is the new argument I want to make, and here's the reasons for my new argument. This is why you should listen to me and not what everybody else has said, right? So if you start with, here's my new argument, I don't even know if you understand the question. And so it's not only the question of, can this person get a reputable publisher, but are they engaging in the conversation? Scholarship is nothing more than a conversation amongst people in different places, but also not just presently across time, right? Mm-hmm. So you're not just in dialogue with me, right? If you're arguing about like who Jesus is, you're talking to Augustine, you're talking to Calvin, you're talking to Luther, you're talking to whoever is a modern scholar to this day. And so if you're not in conversation with these people, then I'm not taking it seriously. The most of the stuff that I read online, they're not even in dialogue with the best versions of the Christian argument. They're in dialogue with popular stuff. They're not really in the conversation. They're just dialoguing with a caricature, right? Right. Say, well, like, you see little videos where like the church is always stealing people's money, therefore you should leave the church, right? Yeah. And look at this pastor in his car, and look at Creflo Dollar and all of this other stuff. But who's putting forward prosperity pastors as the picture of Christianity? So when you come at them, I'm like, amen. I'm coming at them too. Right. That's right. If you're saying to me, if that's the version of Christianity that you reject, I reject that version too.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Right.
Yeah, but have you spoken with Calvin? Have you spoken with Augustine? Have you spoken with Luther? Have you spoken with any of the reformers? Have you spoken with the modern scholars of this day? Have you read any piece of scholarship? Any piece? Like, so the first thing is, before I want to hear what you say, I want to say, what have you read? Right. And what happens, and I don't want to belabor this point, because what happens is people find something that they don't like about Christianity, and that kind of discomfort turns into a complaint, and then they kind of argue with that complaint. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
So, but there's a difference between being upset with the current practice of Christianity than understanding Christianity as a religion and then critiquing it. Right. I mean, just simple stuff. Like this idea that like Christianity is like a white person's religion, it's just demonstrably false. Right. Demonstrably false. Right. Absolutely. It's so weak as an argument that it's impossible to address. I remember I was leading this ministry one time, and I was saying, hey, we should go and feed the homeless, right? And this person asked me, well, why are we feeding the homeless? Why shouldn't they take care of themselves? And the question was so whack, it threw me off. I'm like, wait a minute.
It's crazy.
That's so wrong. I don't even know where to start. Like Jesus, I'm like, do I start with Jesus in this concern for the poor? Do I start with Exodus? Like, do I start with creation? So like some of this stuff is so misunderstands the fundamental orientation of Christianity.
Yeah, that's one of the questions. You got to walk away. You just got to be like, whatever, bro.
Yeah. And so it's hard to not go whatever, but you just want to go, well, hold on. We know that one of the 4 early centers of Christianity, sorry, this is the exact topic, for example, though, is in Alexandria, in Egypt.
Uh-oh.
Jesus went to Egypt. Like, he was raised literally in Africa.
Right.
So how is you're talking about Jerusalem and Alexandria being 2 of the earliest centers of Christianity in the world, and how is that a white person's religion? And so,
right.
So those are the kinds of things when I say, if this stuff doesn't even have a basic understanding of Christianity, then I don't do it. Like, for instance, if I came and I don't even understand anything about Islam, but I want to start critiquing it, a Muslim's going to say, well, that's not the religion that I recognize, so you can't talk to me. And so it is the first job of scholarship is to patiently understand the perspective of your opponent and articulate it in a way that they understand, and then critique it. Right. And if your scholarship can't do that, then I can't take it seriously. It's not scholarship; it's just propaganda.
Well, you see, and this is where I would go with it too. And I think I'm wondering if the church, and I hate to even say it this way, but almost particularly the black church. I mean, have we set ourselves up for these types of things by just kind of being kind of anti-intellectual? And if so, I mean, how do we? Is it just, do we need to reclaim that in order to kind of get our street cred back? I guess it's a serious religion.
I wouldn't characterize just the black church as being anti-intellectual. I would say there's the church in different parts of the church at different times have had issues with intellectualism. I would say the history of the black church is a lot more complicated because we didn't always have access to education. Right. So it wasn't like we sitting there with like all of these seminaries open to us who are sympathetic to our concerns, and we said, no, I don't want to go, right? Yeah. It was like, if you try to go to seminary and you might get hit upside the head or lynch, then you might just read your Bible and do the best you can. Right. Very I would say that because of black entrepreneurship, sometimes like this idea that I just get this, but this isn't limited to the black church. It's actually limited. It goes to a lot of the free church traditions, the Baptist traditions in general. It's not just black Baptists, Baptists in general. This idea that I get a call from God, and there isn't a larger organization that vets that call. So I'm an Anglican, right? And so if I say I got a call from God, well, my bishop's concerned if I have that call, right? And like the AME church is someone else. And so, or in the Presbyterian church, you go to the presbytery. So I think that what happens sometimes is that because of the entrepreneurial nature of black church startups, it doesn't matter whether or not you have the credentials as long as you have the charisma. And so that can sometimes cause a problem because they may not, it's up to the person to be interiorly motivated to get themselves educated. But I'll say this much, at my school, where I teach in Northeastern Seminary, it's about 40% black. And a lot of African-American clergy who go there are already in churches. They already have ministry, but they go back because they want to grow and learn. And I have a lot of respect for people who are already getting a check, who are already pastors, who then decide, I want to come to seminary and learn. And I will say that it's never too late. It's never too late to learn more. And if you teach God's people, then you have the responsibility to learn as much as you can. Sure. And I always use analogy, man. You wouldn't want a nurse who just said, I just learned nursing from the internet. And I just read nursing. Right. You wouldn't want to does that. And so seminary education isn't everything. But for anyone who has the opportunity, I would recommend it as strongly as possible. It's very rare that people say, I didn't learn anything from seminary, unless you just went to the wrong school, and then that's just on you for discernment. But I do think that the church sometimes, and not just the black church, churches in general, can be led by people who have a lot of entrepreneurial gifts and a lot of evangelistic gifts. Interesting. But they haven't taken the time to develop to drink deeply from the well of the Christian tradition. Right. I mean, this stuff didn't just start with us, man. It didn't just start with us. The church has been here for 2,000 years, over 2,000 years. And the church has something to say. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You remember, I don't know how old you are, but you remember, I think it's the Source Awards, back when Outkast won, like, the best new artist. Oh, yeah, yeah, absolutely, yeah. It was during the time when there was, like, a beef between the East and the West, and like, right. Andre, they were getting booed. And Andre stood up and said, "Hey, look, man, the South got something to say, right?"
Yeah.
He's like, "Y'all can play us, right? Y'all can boo us, but we're gonna show y'all." And then actually, a criminal draft after that, right?
Yeah, it was that album was legendary. Yeah.
Listen, man, I'm listening to it to this day. That's why it's on my mind. But I would say that church history and theology got something to say to the Black people. And even though it oftentimes gets ignored, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's something that I think that can benefit us. And we sometimes will just say, "No, man, all I need is the Bible. I don't need to learn this stuff." But I'm telling you, the theological tradition of Christianity has something to say to the Black experience. And I'm a better Christian for it. And I would recommend as many people as they can to look into it, man, and to learn. Even if you can't go to seminary, man, read the great books.
See, that's interesting, man. And let me ask you this, because you're in a very unique position. On the one hand, you're a guy that might wake up in the morning and be listening to Outkast, and at the same time, you got direct access to a legend like N.T. Wright. You know what I'm saying? In your studies, I mean, that's phenomenal. I mean, how do you do you find yourself kind of being like, I guess maybe like a conduit between that level of scholarship in the Black community, particularly in your area of Pauline theology? What are some things that you're seeing in from a theological standpoint that kind of interacts with where the African American church is, or just the church in general is today?
Well, it is strange, man. It's almost like the further you go in academics, the less Black people you see. Mm-hmm. And not only that, at least for me, I tell my students that my Blackness and my Christianity are both hard-fought realities. So, like, there's all of these pressures all of the time for me to kind of modulate my Blackness when I'm around people. And it took a long time for me, especially often all-white settings, to feel comfortable being authentically Black and being who. And this is, once again, authentically Black for me is I'm from Alabama. So I'm a Southern Black dude. So, like, Atlanta and all of that stuff influenced me. And so, like, embracing that identity. I love hip-hop, right? Mm-hmm. And embracing that identity, but also, and so on one side, I'm getting this pressure to kind of not be that. But on the other side, it's like being authentically for Jesus have both been difficult realities for me. So I say, like, those things, even in my scholarship, is something I'm learning to deal with. When I first went to seminary, I kind of had this idea, and it's related to the question that you had earlier. Mm-hmm. Hey, man, Black church needs to be more theologically sophisticated. But the more time I spend in evangelicalism, I was like, the evangelicals need to listen to the Black church. So I just felt like I've learned to appreciate what was going on. I learned to appreciate what I was taught growing up and what that has to say to scholarship today. And I would say, like, a perfect example of that is that, like, right now you see the church fight, like, basically a civil war going on in the church between those who are advocating for social justice and those who are just saying you should focus on the gospel. And I was like, in the Black church I grew up in, it was like both. There was never this fight. And so, like, I keep trying to tell, and I have a lot of friends who are leaving, like, white friends who are leaving Christianity because they feel like the church is for the poor. I was like, well, I don't know what church you went. Wow. That's not my church.
Yeah.
As it relates to Pauline scholarship more particularly, I would say that there's been this huge movement in the last, 30 to 40 years to think of Paul more as a Jewish theologian, a Jewish Christian theologian than he had been in the past. Previously, we kind of thought of Paul as just like basically proto-Calvin and proto-Luther, who just dropped these abstract theological principles out of the sky, right? About justification and sanctification. And so Paul was just purely a systematic theologian. And now we're starting to realize the importance of the Jewish narratives in Paul's thought, especially the importance of the Exodus tradition. We're starting to realize that Paul was heavily influenced mentally by saying to his congregation, hey, we're the new people of God. Jesus Christ has inaugurated the new Exodus. We're heading towards freedom. The Spirit is the cloud that's leading us from slavery into the promised land. And Jesus is our, right? And so I just like that's what I was told in the black church growing up.
Yeah,
right? The black church historically thought in redemptive historical terms, right? The black church has always emphasized the importance of the meta narrative, from creation to Abraham to the importance of the Exodus in revealing God's character. Well, here's the thing, right? You can understand why, because of the slavery thing.
Sure.
But what you see now is that not only was this slavery narrative important to black people in America, it was formative for Jews in the Second Temple period, right? Because if you're a Jew in slavery, effectively under the power of the Roman Empire, what are you saying? You're saying that God's going to do for us what he did for the original people who left Egypt. Right. And so what Paul is saying is this great narrative of God, the liberator from slavery, is happening in and through the person of Christ. And what I think N.T. Wright has done is he has, among other things, he has brought to the forefront in Pauline scholarship and said, listen, Pauline scholarship, at the center of Paul's gospel is the kingship of Jesus, right? Over the world, who invites all people into his kingdom. And one of the controlling pictures to understand that is the Exodus, right? And that may seem to most people, that may be non-controversial because this is basic Christianity 101. But that's not how Pauline scholarship has operated over the last 30 to 40 years. One of the perfect examples of that is the idea that it was an assumption in Pauline scholarship that by the time you get to Paul's day, Christ has ceased to mean Messiah, but it just become to mean a second name. So, right, first name Jesus, last name Christ, right?
Right.
But he came along and said, no, like Paul was a Jew. He's not going to forget that Christ means Messiah. So every time you see Jesus Christ, you should be thinking King Jesus. And I don't know who does more King Jesus than black people.
Right? Yeah, nobody. Trust me, nobody.
And not only that, and this is controversial, so it may be complicated, but I'll say it at this point.
Go for it. Yeah.
He said is we have downplayed in Pauline scholarship, but in the New Testament in general, the importance of racial reconciliation in the gospel story, right? But if you read Romans, if you read Galatians, if you read Acts, at the center of this narrative is this question: how can Jews and Gentiles live together under the one King Jesus? So you've not understood the gospel properly, and you haven't made ethnic reconciliation under the lordship of Jesus a central part of how you talk about the gospel. So it's such that you can't simply say it's only about how me, the individual, get saved from sin. It's about how God is saving all people through the cross and what that means about how we live and work together. And so he has, in his own way, put the issue of the reconciliation of the races at the forefront of what's going on, which is actually clearly true, right? Wow. The real issue in Galatians is, do I have to become Jewish in order to be a Christian, right? So we tend to think of in terms of legalism, right? Do you have to do the works of the law in order to be saved, right?
Right.
But the works of the law isn't simply a means of salvation. The works of the law, to do the works of the law means you become Jewish, right?
Right.
And do the works of the law means that you do the things required of Jews in order to be saved, right? And so you're basically saying to the Gentiles, not only do you have to do these things to be saved, you effectively have to become Jewish. And Paul, in at least in one way of looking at it, or at least what I think is correct, is Paul is saying that the cross of Christ is sufficient to faith in the cross of Christ is sufficient to save all people. Therefore, a Gentile does not have to become Jewish by doing the works of the law in order to be saved. And so, yes, there is the issue that no human being can earn his own salvation. No one's denying that.
Sure.
But what we want to bring to the fore is the idea of what that would mean for what that would mean culturally. You can't really say there's no Jew nor Greek, for we're all one in Christ if you got to become Jewish.
It's true.
Right?
Now, I know right now my Hebrew Israelite listeners are cussing at you right now because what they would want to say, and it'd be interesting to get your perspective on this. So their interpretation is when you see terms like Greek, Gentile, and so on in the New Testament coming into Christ, that these are people who are ethnically Jewish but just got mixed in with non-Hebrew cultures. How would you come back at that? At that particular interpretation.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Could you repeat that again?
Yeah, sure. So what they would say, what the Hebrew Israelites would say, is that when Paul is referring to Gentiles, he's talking about people who were ethnically Jewish, like Jewish by blood, who had gotten mixed in with different cultures of Gentiles and so on and so forth. And so, God is calling these, I guess, wayward and lost, ethnic Jews out of these Gentile cultures, rather than these people being actual, by blood Gentiles. So, what was that?
So first of all, there is no ethnically pure Israel anywhere in the Bible. So like Judaism, Israel was never defined primarily by ethnicity. If you look, so it's kind of like, this is what you talk about, like people being wrong on top of wrong.
Yeah.
If you look at the end of Genesis, and Manasseh and Ephraim, like the story of Genesis where Joseph, it says, "Come bless my two sons," right? Mm-hmm. And then instead of blessing them, he brings them into the tribes, right? Mm-hmm. He says, "Okay, I'm not just going to bless you. You're going to be my own sons. You're going to be part of my tribe." Right. Well, Ephraim and Manasseh were actually the sons of Joseph and his Egyptian wife, right? Mm-hmm. So if you read that passage, actually what Joseph says is, now God's promises to bless the nations are being fulfilled because these two sons are being brought into my family. Mm-hmm. And so what Joseph is saying here is, by bringing in these two multi-ethnic kids and making them a part of the tribes of Israel, God's promises to bless the world are being fulfilled. Mm-hmm. And so from the beginning, Israel was multi-ethnic. 2 of the 12 tribes are half Egyptian. Mm-hmm. And so you can never simply define Israel by blood. If you actually look, when they leave Egypt, it says a mixed multitude went up out of Egypt. Mm-hmm. And so even as the people of Israel leave Egypt, there's Egyptians who are being brought in. If you come into the conquest of the Promised Land, you see the story of Rahab being brought in. Later on, you get the story of Ruth and Naomi. And so Israel has never been defined solely by ethnic birth. Because this is the point that Paul makes in Romans, right? Mm-hmm. Not all children of Abraham are automatically Israelites. Because Isaac and Ishmael are both born, and he says, I'm going to bless Isaac, even though he's ethnically from Abraham. Sorry, I'm going to bless Ishmael, even though he's biologically from Abraham, but he's not the children of promise. Right. That's not Isaac. And so you can't make any arguments around who Israel is vis-a-vis blood, because Israel has never been defined purely by your biological descent from Abraham or anybody. Because if you want to be circumcised and join Israel at any point in its history, you could. Mm-hmm. Jesus, very point in the Gospels, Matthew, right? When he speaks about the genealogy being mixed. And so the moment that you come to me and start talking about some kind of ethnic distinction and basing some exegesis on it, you don't understand it. Now, as far as what Paul means in Romans or Galatians about a Gentile, a Gentile, by definition, in across the Bible, right, from beginning to end, right, it's uncircumcised individual who does not keep the law, right, a non-Jew. For Paul, there was categories of people: circumcised people, Jews, and everybody else. So Paul was not saying to Jews who are Gentiles, who are living amongst Gentiles, to come out. Because Paul actually makes this point, because he says this, right, in Romans, right? Are not you who are Jews who live like Gentiles? So he knows, like, there's people who are Jewish who are living like Gentiles. So he knows that he says, won't your circumcision be counted as uncircumcision? So he says that if you're Jewish, right, but you out in the world and you living like a Gentile, your circumcision means nothing for you. Right. And so this idea, Paul had this idea of a Jew as a Gentile who was living amongst Jews. I mean, that's just nonsense, man. And that's what I'm talking about, where if you just spent 15 minutes reading about doing a lexical search on how the word Gentile is used in Paul's letters, you clearly understand that Gentile means non-Jew. That's why Paul says there's neither Jew nor Gentile in Galatians.
Right.
He doesn't mean there's Jews or other kinds of Jews, right? There's Jews or Gentiles,
right?
Slave nor free, male nor female. In each one of those, the one category is juxtaposed against the other category. Right. So Jew, Gentile, opposite. Male, female, opposite. Free, opposite. And so this idea that Gentile in Paul's letters means anything other than non-Jew is just silly.
That is
now,
right.
Paul does say, hey, you can't assume that just because you are Jewish, you are saved, right? So you can say, like, you being treated like a Gentile, right? This is what Paul says in Romans, right? Romans 2. He says, my name is blasphemed amongst the Gentiles because of you. So he said that he was quoting the Old Testament, right, in which God said to Israel, hey, Israel, you guys are sinning so much, the Gentiles are saying there's no difference between the two of us. So that means that obviously Paul thought that there should be a difference between a Jew and a Gentile. Right, and so that's the kind of weird I don't want to be mean. I don't know.
Say what you got to say, man. Say what you got to say.
It's sub-scholarly. And that's like, you can't, this is what I mean. It's almost like if I ran up and, like, if there's a cipher going on, right?
Uh-huh.
Like everybody's coming, and I got bars, y'all. And they hand me the mic. And I go, ABC 1, 2, 3. How you feel about me? They're gonna snatch the mic, right?
right.
And so it's the same thing in the sense of, like, that's just silly. And I'm not even trying to be arrogant.
No, it is what it is. It is what it is, man. But I think you're right. I think it's that lack of study, though. You know what I'm saying, and not being able to tap into. I really like what you said about being in interaction with the scholars that came before you and the people that are having this conversation. When you're not doing that, then these elementary, just silly arguments can hold a lot of weight, for people, and I think that's what we see going on. Does that make sense? Does that sound right? Or
yeah, but I would just say this as clearly as possible. Paul understood a Gentile to be a non-Jew, and that was often ethnically identifiable, but not always, right? There's tons of stories in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and in Paul's own day, where there were Gentiles who were converted, and those Gentiles who were converted, be they black, be they whatever ethnicity, they would have been called Jews. And so, even though Judaism was largely an ethnic identity, it was also ethnic and religious identity that had overlap. And the Bible itself is very clear. I mean, it's as clear as it possibly can be that 2 of the 12 tribes were half Israelite and half African from the beginning. It's in Genesis 49, read it, right? Or Genesis 48, one of those two. And so there's never been, so like the Bible itself from its first book undermines this idea that ethnicity automatically means you're part of God's people. And I don't want to belabor this, but that's how the narrative works over and over again. Right. Because you have something like Esau and Jacob. Well, you think that Esau will be the first one because he's the oldest. But the Bible is consistently undercutting what we think would be the natural order of things. So we're not Jacob, but Esau. You know what I mean? Not Esau, Jacob. And you see this over and over again where the one you think would be on top, right? Not the oldest son, but David. And so the Bible has this vision of God turning things upside down and valuing the things that we don't value.
That'll push right there, bro.
If God does that, then anytime you come to me with some kind of racialized theory of salvation, then you dismiss me because you don't understand how the Bible works.
Right. That's good, bro. I'm telling you, you can preach at any church right there with that right there, man. That'll preach. I got there's a couple more areas I definitely want to get at you before I let you go. Let me go here right quick. Galatians 1:4. You wrote some things that I was kind of doing my little homework here. You talked about Galatians 1:4 and the implications of that in terms of how we interpret the book of Galatians and getting into, some of the curses and things like that. Can you kind of, give us a little, I guess, synopsis of where you were going with that?
Sure. most scholars when they see that when they read Galatians 1:4 and it says Jesus gave himself to deliver us from the present evil age. Mm-hmm. Most scholars recognize that the idea of someone giving themselves over is an allusion to the Isaianic servant narrative, right? So the Isaianic servant narrative is Isaiah 53 that we all know about, right? Mm-hmm. Where the servant dies for the sins of the people. That passage is underneath most of the interpretations of Jesus' death for our sins, right? Mm-hmm. Jesus is he's the suffering servant, right? He dies for our sins.
Right.
But what people don't often pay attention to is, and this is what I'm talking about when you think about Paul as a Jewish theologian, go back and actually read the context in which the suffering servant narrative actually occurs. Mm-hmm. The suffering servant narrative begins with Israel in slavery because of their sins, right? Mm-hmm. So if you read the Old Testament, God says, hey, Israel, if you keep sinning, I'm going to send you into exile. You're going to die. All of these bad things are going to happen to you. Mm-hmm. And these bad things should happen to Israel. And the question is, well, what is God going to do about this? Israel's in slavery and they're under the curse when the servant arrives on the scene. The servant then dies for the sins of the people. Mm-hmm. And because the servant dies for the sins of the people, God ends the curse for the nation of Israel. So the nation of Israel remains under the curses of the Deuteronomic covenant until the servant dies for their sins. If you then read the next chapter in Isaiah 54, right? It says what does it say? Because the servant dies for the sins, it says to rejoice, O Mother Jerusalem, right? Rejoice, mm-hmm. Jerusalem. You who was barren, who had no children, now you have tons of children. And now you're going to expand out to inherit the nation. So if you go from Isaiah 52 to 54, this is what happens. Israel's in slavery because of sin. Someone says the Exodus is about to happen. And then this guy shows up who dies for the sins of the people. Mm-hmm. Because he died for the sins of the people, God ends the curse. And this people, who are called the seed, expand exponentially to inherit the nation. And I'm arguing that what Paul is saying in Galatians as a whole, that Jesus is the suffering servant, right? He's the one who dies for the sins of the people, right? Mm-hmm. Who ends the curse that was over the people. And because of that, because the people are no longer under the curse, they can expand outward to inherit the nation. And Paul's argument is, in Galatians, we are that seed. We're the seed who have come to life as a result of the death of the servant, and now we're expanding. Now this seed is expanding outward to inherit the nation. And so it's not simply this idea that you use Isaiah 53 to talk about this is how someone's death can pay for your sins. Mm-hmm. Paul sees in Isaiah 52 to 54 the narrative of slavery and curse ended by the death of someone that results in the previously cursed seed expanding outward to inherit the world. And Paul is saying that now in Galatians, Jesus is that suffering servant who has died for the sins of the people, who's ended, and he talks about this all of the time. You're no longer under the curse. You're no longer under slavery. Mm-hmm. You are able to succeed if you believe in Jesus. And so I'm arguing, or at least I think that I'm correct, that it's not simply this idea of suffering and death that Paul is drawing on in Isaiah. He's drawing on a whole narrative of slavery, curse, freedom, and the inheriting of the nations through the death of Jesus, who dies on our behalf so that we might join Abraham's seed and in so doing inherit the world.
Now I gotta come back with it. So if that is correct, then if I'm understanding you correctly, then you would say then that the curses of Deuteronomy, would you say that they came to an end at the point where Jesus died for our sins? Is that what you're saying, or?
Yeah, I mean that's what the gospel says. That's what the gospel says.
Right. So there's no like reverberating or curse. There's no like ripple effect of the curse still going on today. Would you agree with that?
Yes, for those who are in Christ, no, there is no curse that continues for us who are in Christ.
Got you. Okay, that's another thing that the Hebrews say is that they're reliving, the curse of Deuteronomy, and that's why we're over here in America with slave ships and all that sort of a thing. That's kind of where. That's why I was asking that question.
So this is controversial. So feel free to So here's the thing. Well, that's not. I won't even say that. The curse, the Deuteronomic curses, right? Mm-hmm. That was spoken about was spoken to the people of Israel. Israel, if you don't do these things, you're going to be under the curse, right? Mm-hmm. So the curse, the Jewish people are the people who are under the curse of the law. Jesus has removed that curse from Israel. And because Israel is no longer under the curse of the law, they're no longer under the law at all. Such that those who are in Christ, the law no longer defines the people of God. Mm-hmm. And so this idea that the curse could be ongoing after the death of Jesus nullifies the atonement. Like it's impossible to argue that Jesus' death, I mean, it's almost like a form of Pelagianism. If Jesus' death is sufficient to end the curse, then what is?
Right.
Now, and this is the distinction between the already and the not yet in Christian theology, right? Mm-hmm. We're no longer under the curse. We're no longer under the curse. We still struggle with sin, and the after effects of sin still exist in this world. And so, even though we're not under the curse, are we still dealing with the effects of the fall? Well, yes. Mm-hmm. But that reality, right, is not the ultimate Christian reality, right? This world that we see is not what defines us. We're defined by the resurrection.
Right.
And so since has defeated death, right, we know the kingdom is coming. We know that it's begun, but it's not been fully inaugurated. And so as a Christian, you can say, hey, no man can enslave me because I'm free in Christ. Mm-hmm. Now, do I experience the fullness of that freedom now? No, I don't. But do I believe that Jesus is going to come back and establish his kingdom such that I will experience that freedom? Yes. But this idea that there is God is actively cursing Christians after the death of Jesus is sub-Christian.
Yeah, and I'm trying to figure out how they do with that because I think, I guess they would say black people. The guy is cursing black people, and it's just going to be that way until Jesus comes back. I guess is how they go with it. I don't know.
God is cursing black people?
Yeah, well, according to Hebrew Israelite, they believe that the reason why slaves were brought over here is because they are the real Hebrews. Their ancestors disobeyed the covenant laws, and so as a result, they are now here. They came here as slaves, and they're still under the curse. And then their eschatology is kind of varies, but that's kind of how they.
The only way you could say something like that is if you. I'm sorry. A black Hebrew Israelite Christian in any sense, or is Jesus not a part of this narrative?
Now, well, they definitely wouldn't like the term Christian. They would prefer to say either messianic or non-messianic, or someone might. So the bulk of them would include Jesus, but they don't believe that he's God and things like that for the most part. There's a bunch of different types, but yeah.
So for the Christian, then it's impossible to imagine us being as a part of the curse. The second one is that the Israelite people, when we talk about the covenant curses, I would just say that for I guess it's hard for me to talk about this, like to argue for the Christian, because someone who's not a Christian doesn't believe in resurrection. I would say something along the lines of you then get into like a totally different set of questions as to who Israel is and how they're defined. And Israel is defined historically by those who keep the Torah, and is not defined ethnically by it being black people or anything else. So I guess it'd be hard for me to kind of deal with it unless I had some clarity as to kind of what they're saying about the curse. But I would say for Paul and anyone who's reading the New Testament, there is no Christian who's under the curse.
Gotcha. Good. Well, see, now you've just given me reason to invite you back. So now you got to come back for another episode. You just put yourself out there for another invite. But hey, man, yeah, I've kept you a little longer than I think I was supposed to. We're coming right up here at on the minute mark. But I just definitely want to say I appreciate you and the work that you're putting in, man. And I would like to invite you back as your studies progress, and maybe after you're able to defend your PhD, maybe you can come back and kind of share with us how that went and things of that nature.
Yeah, I would. I'd be happy to do that. Anytime, man. Just let me know.
Okay, man. Well, hey, look, I appreciate you, bro. And look, y'all, we just had a meat sandwich of theology, and I love it. So I love you guys out there. That's another episode in the books. See y'all next time.